Disney World's $25 billion empire just hit a wall, and the fallout is way worse than anyone expected. Families showed up to the happiest place on Earth and walked into empty gates, silent walkways, and a vibe that felt nothing like the commercials. Prices shot up, crowds disappeared, and the magic? It didn't fade, it evaporated. But here's where it gets wild. Insiders say this wasn't sudden. It was a decade of warnings ignored, guests priced out, and leadership doubling down on decisions that pushed the resort to the breaking point. If you think this is just a slow year, think again. Because what's happening right now could rewrite the entire future of family travel. Where the crowds went, families returning to the resort expected the early morning surge, the hum of anticipation, and the long lines that usually wrapped around the entrance. Instead, they walked toward gates that felt strangely open. The walkways were wide, the noise was muted, and the familiar push of a crowd simply was not there. People paused, looking around, as if something essential had been misplaced. For many of them, this quiet moment created a sense of disbelief that stayed with them the entire day. Parents whispered to each other, wondering if they had chosen the wrong time of year or if something had changed without warning. Children asked why everything felt slower and why the excitement they had seen in commercials seemed missing. Guests who had visited for decades recognized the shift immediately. A place that once overflowed with energy now felt drained, as though the magic itself had stepped back. Empty gates are never just empty gates. They are a signal that something deeper is shaking the foundation. And for a destination built on constant motion, seeing all that stillness marked the first moment when visitors knew the aura had cracked. The warning was subtle, but it mattered more than anyone realized. But empty walkways were only the beginning. When tickets finally broke the middle class, across many households, families gathered at kitchen tables with notebooks, calculators, and a sense of hesitation they had never felt before. Planning a trip to the resort used to be exciting, but the growing cost of entry had created a barrier few could comfortably cross. Tickets, lodging, and meals had climbed year after year, stretching budgets to the point where even a short visit felt unrealistic. Parents who once made the trip an annual tradition now faced tough decisions about how to spend their limited savings. The conversations were no longer about which park to visit first, but about whether the trip made financial sense at all. Families compared the cost of a week at the resort to several months of essential bills. Others realized they could take an entirely different vacation for a fraction of the price. The shift was undeniable. A place that built its name on being accessible to everyday families had grown out of reach for many of them. With every price increase, more households felt quietly pushed aside. The frustration was not only about money, it was about the feeling that something once meant for everyone was slipping away. Right before their eyes, it disappeared. But cost was not the only thing pushing people away. If you value straight, honest breakdowns of what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And tell me what you think about these early warning signs, because your perspective adds something leadership has been ignoring for far too long. Construction everywhere, magic nowhere. Visitors who had known the resort for decades walked in expecting familiar sights, only to find towering construction walls redirecting their every step. Entire pathways were blocked, turning simple routes into confusing detours. Music that once filled the air was replaced by the distant echo of machinery working behind tall barriers. What should have been a seamless experience now felt like navigating a project site instead of a celebrated destination. Longtime fans felt a wave of nostalgia as they remembered earlier visits, when every corner revealed a surprise. Now, those corners revealed nothing but plywood and caution signs. Attractions they had looked forward to were closed for months, sometimes years, leaving fewer options for families who had invested heavily in their trip. The company promoted these closures as preparation for a brighter future, but guests were paying full price for a present that felt incomplete. The disappointment grew stronger with each blocked-off area. People came for immersion and found inconvenience. They came for wonder and found work zones. Many visitors left the parks believing the magic had been traded for endless construction cycles, and that realization stayed with them long after they returned home. It was a turning point unmistakably, and for first-timers, it hit even harder. Disney failed its new guests. First-time guests arrived carrying high expectations shaped by stories, commercials, and decades of reputation. They imagined grand parades, vibrant characters, and entertainment around every corner. Instead, they encountered reduced show schedules, missing performers, and long stretches of quiet, where activity should have been constant. The park felt thinner, as if entire sections of its personality had been quietly removed without explanation. Parents tried to remain positive, but the missing moments became impossible to ignore. They had planned for their children to experience the classic magic they themselves had heard about growing up. Instead, they found trimmed parades and characters appearing for only brief intervals. Many waited for shows that never happened or events quietly canceled earlier in the season. The sense of anticipation that usually defined a first visit slowly dissolved throughout the day. For newcomers, this experience carried extra weight. Without the memories older visitors held, they judged the resort solely on what they saw in front of them. And what they saw did not match the legend. The sadness in many families' faces reflected a deeper truth. A first impression can shape an entire legacy, and this one was fading fast. Its decline showed in every missed moment. But behind the scenes, a much bigger problem was brewing. Burnout behind the castle. Inside the break rooms, tucked behind the attractions, cast members gathered between shifts with a level of exhaustion that had become impossible to hide. Staffing shortages had pushed everyone to do more with less, and each day seemed heavier than the one before. Positions that once required several people were now handled by one, sometimes with little training and almost no support. Workers who used to bring energy and enthusiasm to their roles now struggled just to maintain the minimum pace. Many spoke quietly about how the job they once loved had slowly turned into something they could barely keep up with. The strain did not stop at the front lines. Custodial teams were stretched thin. Food service workers juggled responsibilities far beyond their job descriptions, and support staff found themselves covering roles they had never prepared for. Every department felt the pressure. The result spilled directly into the guest experience. Longer wait times, slower service, and rushed interactions became daily realities. Visitors sensed the fatigue, even if they could not fully understand the cause behind it. The truth was simple. Burnout spread faster than solutions. And as morale dropped, so did performance, creating a chain reaction that touched every part of the resort's identity. But workers were not the only ones under strain. The boardroom miscalculation. In glass-walled meeting rooms, far removed from the break rooms on the ground, corporate leaders pushed forward with confidence that bordered on denial. They believed the future of the resort lay in premiumization strategies, designed to extract higher revenue from fewer guests. The idea sounded solid on paper, but it ignored a crucial truth. The majority of families visiting the resort were already stretched thin. Executives overlooked that reality in favor of projections built on optimism rather than data. They convinced themselves that people would continue paying more, regardless of economic pressure. The disconnect widened each quarter. Leadership viewed rising prices as a sign of innovation, not a warning. They doubled down on exclusive experiences, costly hotel upgrades, and premium add-ons that most visitors could not afford. Instead of listening to struggling families, they shaped an environment catered toward a smaller, wealthier audience. That shift sent ripple effects throughout the entire operation. Guests who once felt welcomed now felt targeted for upselling. The feeling of inclusion that built the resort's identity began slipping away. Arrogance disguised itself as strategy. The board believed they could guide demand through force of branding alone. Reality disagreed, and the consequences were building faster than they realized. And while the company pushed prices up, others saw an opening. Competitors striking at the perfect moment. Rival theme park executives noticed the cracks forming long before the public did. In their strategy sessions, they studied attendance patterns, guest reviews, and pricing trends. What they saw was an opportunity too good to ignore. While the resort struggled with soaring prices and shrinking value, competitors expanded their offerings with precision. They introduced new attractions, refreshed older ones, and marketed experiences that promised excitement without financial strain. Families looking for alternatives now had real options that felt more practical and more welcoming. These competitors did not need to match the resort's scale. They only needed to offer clearer value. Some parks rolled out flexible ticket packages, others introduced family bundles that made budgeting easier, and a few launched entirely new lands designed to draw in younger audiences. The strategy worked. Crowds that might have once defaulted to the iconic resort began exploring elsewhere, shifting market dynamics in a way not seen in decades. Internal reports revealed the truth. Rival parks were attracting guests who previously traveled exclusively to the flagship destination. While the resort leaned on its brand, others leaned on quality and affordability. The pressure from outside intensified the internal cracks, pushing the empire closer to its breaking point. But none of this compared to the financial weight coming. The $25 billion burden. Financial analysts reviewing the company's earnings reports noticed a troubling pattern. Despite massive spending commitments that totaled nearly $25 billion, the returns were not keeping pace. Investments poured into expansions, infrastructure, and long-term projects that looked impressive on timelines, but failed to generate immediate revenue. The balance between spending and earnings slipped dangerously out of alignment. Analysts warned that without stronger attendance and higher guest satisfaction, the financial strain would intensify. The resort had built its reputation on growth, but the cost of that growth had reached a level few expected. Debt obligations increased, operating expenses soared, and future projects demanded capital the company could not easily spare. Every quarter brought fresh concerns. With attendance softening and guest spending dropping, those massive investments began to look less like bold moves and more like burdens the company could not comfortably carry. This financial pressure seeped into daily operations. Budget cuts hit entertainment, staffing, and maintenance. Departments that once felt secure faced reduced funding. The resort's identity became compromised by cost-saving measures meant to protect the bottom line. Analysts described the situation as a structural imbalance with no quick fix. The warning was clear. The empire's foundation was under real threat. And when the strain finally hit the local community, it got real. Local businesses take the hit. Restaurant owners around the resort began noticing a troubling pattern long before headlines mentioned a downturn. Tables that were normally packed from lunchtime through late evening now sat empty. Families who once flowed in after long days at the parks were no longer showing up in the same numbers. Businesses built around predictable crowd behavior suddenly faced unpredictable silence. For many owners, the anxiety grew with every slow night, every unused chair, and every stack of untouched menus. Shops lining major tourist corridors felt the same pressure. Stores that once depended on souvenir-hungry travelers watched their foot traffic decline sharply. Employees stood behind counters with little to do, hoping each passing car would turn into the parking lot. The entire area began to feel lighter, not in a comforting way, but in a way that signaled economic trouble. Even hotels outside the resort reported shorter booking windows and hesitations from guests who once reserved rooms months in advance. The effects spread far beyond tourism. Local suppliers who furnished food, linens, and services to small businesses saw orders shrink. The entire ecosystem surrounding the parks tightened. What happened inside the resort gates was now bleeding into the city that relied on it for decades, and the financial markets were the next to react. Investors finally see the cracks. During the following quarterly earnings calls, tension filled every question asked by investors. Analysts listened closely as executives attempted to present optimism, but the numbers made the truth harder to hide. Forecasts weakened, attendance trends slipped, and revenue projections failed to match earlier promises. For the first time in many years, the confidence that once defined the company's financial identity began to wobble. Fear crept into discussions as shareholders saw cracks forming beneath the polished surface. Market reports highlighted declining park performance, rising costs, and stalled international growth. For investors who held stock based on the belief that the parks were an unshakable asset, the shift felt alarming. Wall Street thrives on stability, and the situation displayed anything but. The company's aggressive spending commitments, combined with weakening attendance, created pressure that echoed through every analysis. Some investors quietly scaled back their positions, while others demanded clearer explanations for the downturn. Behind closed doors, strategy advisors debated how to calm the markets. None of the solutions came easily. Every decision carried risk. With confidence slipping, the company faced financial scrutiny sharper than any seen in years. Fear spread through investment circles. Old assumption of guaranteed returns finally collapsed, and as money tightened, politics stepped in. If you want more clear, no-nonsense coverage as this situation unfolds, hit subscribe so you never miss the next update. What comes next will shape the future of family travel, and staying informed matters, now more than ever. Political firestorms make a bad situation worse. At the state level, political battles erupted that added another layer of tension to an already strained situation. Policy debates grew louder as lawmakers and corporate representatives clashed over control, influence, and responsibility. Meetings that should have focused on resolving economic issues turned into ideological showdowns. The ongoing disputes sent mixed signals to residents and business owners who depended on the stability of the relationship between the company and the government. Political observers noted how the conflict complicated everything, from infrastructure planning to regulatory oversight. When corporate pride collided with state-level authority, decisions slowed, compromises stalled, and operations became increasingly tangled in red tape. Officials argued over budgets, public responsibilities, and the role of major corporations in shaping local policy. Meanwhile, employees and nearby communities waited for clarity that never seemed to arrive. The tension grew broader than any single dispute. It became symbolic of a deeper divide between government expectations and corporate autonomy. Each new policy announcement or public statement added fuel to an already volatile situation. The resort, once seen as a stabilizing force, now sat at the center of a political storm. Instead of working together, both sides pushed harder, worsening the instability. Meanwhile, the global tourism engine was slowing down. The international visitor decline. In international airports, the once steady flow of tourists heading toward the resort began thinning noticeably. Travel agents reviewed declining booking numbers with a sense of resignation. Economic pressures abroad, shifting travel priorities, and rising global costs all contributed to fewer international families making the journey. For decades, visitors from overseas had provided a reliable revenue cushion, but now that cushion was shrinking faster than the company expected. Tourism analysts tracked the trend with increasing concern. They noted decreases not only in European travelers, but also in key markets across Asia and South America. The decline cut deep because international guests typically stayed longer and spent more during their trips. Losing them meant losing a major financial pillar. Airlines adjusted schedules, reducing certain routes due to lower demand. The ripple effects went far beyond park gates. Inside the resort, the absence was noticeable. Hotels that once welcomed travelers from every corner of the world saw fewer foreign languages in their lobbies. Gift shops that catered to global visitors reported slower sales. The decline created a sense of resignation among analysts, who understood how difficult it would be to recover this segment in the near future. It was a global shift with long-lasting consequences, and the ripples would not stop at the resort's doorstep. Entertainment leaders rethink the future. Executives across the entertainment industry gathered at press events and strategy retreats with a new tone of caution. They studied the collapse unfolding in Orlando and realized how quickly confidence could evaporate when guests felt undervalued. Projects that had once been pitched as ambitious expansions were suddenly placed under careful review. Leaders evaluated cost structures, guest expectations, and long-term profitability with greater scrutiny than at any point in recent years. The message inside boardrooms shifted from growth at all costs to sustainable experiences that respected the financial reality facing families. Many companies adjusted quietly. Some paused large-scale construction plans, while others reworked pricing models to focus on value instead of exclusivity. Marketing teams explored ways to reconnect with audiences who felt pushed aside by premium pricing trends. The downturn at the country's most recognizable resort served as a warning that no brand, no matter how iconic, could ignore the changing expectations of visitors. The industry realized that loyalty could no longer be taken for granted. The ripple effect continued as studios, parks, and independent venues reconsidered their long-term strategies. The collapse had made one thing clear: entertainment must follow the audience, not force the audience to follow it. The stakes had changed, but workers had their own plans. The labor movement seized its moment. Union leaders inside the theme park sector recognized an unprecedented opportunity. Months of strain, coupled with high-profile complaints about working conditions, had created momentum that had not existed in years. In meeting halls and organizing sessions, workers voiced their determination to secure better treatment, reliable schedules, and wages that matched rising living costs. Many employees felt the downturn proved that the system had been stretched to its limit, and that real stability required structural change. Negotiators entered talks with new confidence, stressing that a strong entertainment industry required a supported workforce. Burnout and understaffing were directly hurting guest satisfaction. As unions pushed back, employees gained confidence, shifting the culture. What began as frustration evolved into a long-term reset of expectations and standards that would reshape the industry. And experts saw an even bigger shift coming. Economists warn of a new vacation economy. Economic researchers convened at academic panels to discuss the deeper implications of the resort's collapse. They noted how middle-class spending habits had been changing nationwide. Rising costs in housing, groceries, and transportation forced families to make difficult choices about discretionary spending. Vacations were becoming less about brand loyalty and more about practical value. Economists warned that the old model of assuming families would stretch their budgets for major destinations no longer reflected the reality of household finances. Researchers observed rising regional trips and declining costly vacations, even among stable income families. The Orlando downturn signaled a broader economic shift as households sought transparent, affordable experiences. Experts warned that if major destinations weakened, secondary industries would suffer, reshaping the national vacation economy far beyond theme park borders for many Americans. So what does that mean for families planning ahead? Families rethink future vacations. Inside living rooms across the country, families sat together reviewing maps, brochures, and travel websites with a sense of reflection. The idea of returning to the iconic resort no longer held the same certainty it once did. Instead of assuming it was the default choice, parents weighed new options that offered clearer value and fewer financial barriers. They considered national parks, regional attractions, and destinations that emphasized simplicity over spectacle. The shift did not happen with anger. It happened with clarity. Parents and children discussed budgets, weighing mileage, lodging, and activity costs. Many realized several smaller trips cost less than one Orlando visit, easing the pressure of long-term planning. Vacations shifted from tradition to balance, with families choosing experiences that felt meaningful, affordable, and deliberate instead of expensive obligations. And what comes next will redefine the entire landscape of American vacations. And that's the reality behind Disney's $25 billion crash. The crowds fading, the prices soaring, and the decisions nobody wants to admit were mistakes. But I want to hear your take. Have you seen the decline yourself? Or is the media blowing this up? Drop a comment below. And if you want more honest, unfiltered breakdowns, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.